Hi everyone, I am excited to do today's video because sometimes I feel like I have something to say about a particular transit that is different from or has more color to it than what the conventional interpretation of a transit might mean. And I feel like I have something to say or convey that, in my experience, is more to the point and more correct, more accurate than some of the conventional ways in which we fall into talking about certain psychological things that are associated with a transit. I am doing this video at 4:32 p.m. Pacific time on Saturday the 17th of July, and at about 3:15, so not too long ago, the Sun opposed the planet Pluto. Now, the outer planets are playing and the inner planets are playing an interesting game right now, and it's an interesting narrative. As you know, since about the time of the eclipses, and even before that when it comes to Mars, as planets entered, I'm gonna start with, because planets are always moving and they're always making aspects to something or the other. As planets moved through the sign of Gemini, because we had a Gemini solar eclipse on June the 10th, under which's shadow we are, and if you know, and as you know, that new moon solar eclipse was conjunct or retrograde Mercury, so dealing with past issues, past relationships, past topics, past situations, and making one's mind up about them is very much the order of the day. I'm going to start with the transits in Gemini. As planets enter Gemini, they squared Jupiter, then they squared Neptune. Then when they entered the sign of Cancer, they trined Jupiter and trined Neptune. And just before they move into the sign of Leo, they oppose Pluto. Once they come into the sign of Leo, they oppose Saturn and then Jupiter. And then once they enter Virgo, they oppose Neptune. And that is as far as I'm going to go. Once we go through the Neptune opposition, we'll start to see planets again trine certain planets again, especially Neptune. I'm more. Let me just take it from the Gemini square of Neptune to the opposition of Neptune. And strangely enough, and interestingly enough, the next few lunations, the important Aquarius full moons, because we have 2 of them this year, and the Leo new moon, all are in conversation, of course, with these transits. Ultimately, by the time we get to the second Aquarius full moon, and even the Leo new moon, we have important oppositions to Neptune taking place. As you know, somewhere over this summer, the theme of playing poker, dealing with fears, dealing with gaslighting, dealing with deception, dealing with delusion, with issues even going back to 2015, 2016, all of those have been on the table. And indeed, if you want to follow that narrative, you can go back to the Mercury and Gemini video I did and all the videos since then, including the eclipse videos, and that'll give you a sense of what has been going on astrologically. Now, as far as the personal planets are concerned, and I'll include Mars as a personal planet, Mars and Venus are further ahead than the Sun and Mercury, and they have already opposed Saturn, and they are getting ready to enter Virgo, and they will at a certain point oppose Neptune, Jupiter and Neptune. The Sun opposes Pluto today, and then about a week from today, and at a time when this was going to be quite pronounced as far as the first Aquarius full moon on July 24th is concerned, and let me make sure I have this right. Yeah, Mercury will oppose Pluto on July the 25th. So the Sun opposes Pluto on July the 17th, Mercury opposes Pluto on July the 25th. And it's the Mercury opposition that is important, because when you have personal planets which tend to travel close together, and by that I mean Mercury, the Sun, and Venus, and sometimes Mars, the sequence of those planets traveling relatively close together through the signs tells a story for that particular year as to when something is going to gain priority. And there's something about communications and contracts and agreements that, because it's trailing everybody else right now, Mars and Venus, or at this point in time, Venus and Mars, and then the Sun, that issues or matters that have to be settled kind of have to wait until Mercury has its say with each of these transits after the other planets have made those transits, whether it is the square, well, Jupiter square, Neptune square, Pluto opposition, Jupiter square, Neptune square, Jupiter trine, Neptune trine, Pluto opposition, Saturn opposition, and then Jupiter and Neptune opposition. Now, at some point, let me just, I'm sorry, I have so much information I want to share. I'm mentally doing a kind of evaluation of what to focus on and what not to focus on so that this does not become too complicated. The Sun opposes Pluto every year, and it opposes Pluto roughly at the same time every year because Pluto moves so slowly. In fact, the Sun opposes Pluto every year within 2 or 3 days, 3 days at the maximum of when it opposed Pluto last year. So if today is the 27th, it wouldn't be surprised if the Sun opposed Pluto on the 18th or 19th of last year. Actually, I'm getting confused whether it's before or after, irrespective. The Sun opposes Pluto around the same time every year. We go through this transit every year. We survive it every year. We've survived it all throughout. I say that only because when it comes to the Sun opposition Pluto, a lot of people treat this kind of transit as if it's happening in their natal chart, as opposed to it just being a transit that affects us over the course of about 10 days. I would say 5 or 6 days. Part of it is that Pluto, conventionally in Western astrology, has developed a reputation for power play and manipulation and control, and rightly so. When planets like Venus and Mars and Mercury oppose Pluto, we tend to not give them a lot of weight, but when the Sun opposes Pluto, we somehow treat it. We give the Sun a lot of a certain kind of yang importance, when I find the Sun really operates very subconsciously. When the Sun opposes a planet, it's like a full moon, right? Because at the time of a full moon, the Sun opposes the moon. You have a full moon. Similarly, I want you to think of when the Sun opposes any other planet, like Pluto, think of it as a full Pluto. Then when the Sun is going to oppose Saturn, think of it as a full Saturn, and then Jupiter, a full Jupiter, and then Neptune, a full Neptune. When there's a full anything, because the Sun is shining its bright subconscious spotlight on it, issues related with that planet are illuminated, because the moon stands for our impulses, our emotions, our reactions, our emotional truth about certain situations. Full moons tend to be heightened. Also, the moon stands for, and this is my experience, our experience with the real world as we go through it. Wherever the moon is, whichever house it occupies, it wouldn't surprise me if at any given time matters related to that house are front and center for us every 2.5 days. So the moon is right now in Scorpio. Where does Scorpio sit in your chart? Wouldn't surprise me if those matters are somehow front and center for you right now. And so a full moon can bring either external manifestation in terms of completions, can mean that something is spotlit that has to do with our own personal experience of the world, or else it can mean that our emotions and our emotional truth about something is being revealed. Similarly, when we experience a full Pluto, it's very likely that over the past 5 days or so, 7 days or so, and maybe over the next couple of days, our relationship with situations of a scorpionic nature have been coming up for their annual review, is the way I will put it. Why scorpionic nature? Pluto rules Scorpio. I should really say Plutonian nature, but most people may not fully know, who are watching this may not know what I mean by Plutonian. I think we have a much greater, I find that we have a much greater familiarity with the zodiac signs and what they stand for than we do when it comes to certain planets. The planet Pluto and the sign of Scorpio, which Pluto rules, share similar characteristics. And I think somewhere underneath this, when we're talking about a challenging transit like an opposition, we have to look at the more challenging or negative or lower vibrations of the sign or the planet involved. It's not as if signs and planets do not have higher vibrations, but it's likely not going to be the higher vibrations that are triggered by the sun opposing them. This is why when the sun opposes the moon and we have a full moon, we can have a meltdown, or we can get really heightened, or we can get really worked up, or we can really have to pay attention to the emotional truths that are being revealed. When it comes to Pluto, it would not surprise me for the past week or so, and even for the next couple of days, we are not preoccupied by our enmeshments with other people of a Plutonian scorpionic nature. And that typically means, in its lower vibration, a sense of over-involvement. Okay? Someone is trying to control us. It could be a person, it could be an organization, it could be an institution, it could be a situation. Or also, and this is something that gets missed with this transit because sort of the victim mindset is so pronounced at present culturally. So what can get ignored is we might be playing or trying to exercise a certain kind of control over someone else when it does not have consent, when it is over-involved. Somewhere I find that individuals who are happily coupled, happily involved with others, tend not to attract or live in the lower vibrations of scorpionic tendencies or plutonian tendencies. If you are happily coupled or happily involved, whatever that means to you, happily enmeshed with other people, even in a business partnership, it's not as if the sign of Scorpio or scorpionic tendencies or 8th house issues or plutonian issues are not present. They absolutely are. It's just that the lower vibrations are absent. It's when people are lonely, often feeling alone, even if they might be in relationship, unsuccessfully in relationships, and more than that, when people feel rejected, that the lower vibrations of Scorpio and Pluto get brought out. Ultimately, what Pluto manages or is trying to aim for, what the sign of Scorpio manages or trying to aim for, is a happy intimacy and involvement. Romantic, sexual, financial, holistic. It's seeking not just camaraderie, actually not just romance, but a real union, a real involvement, and it's seeking support. Now, if you have certain types of scorpionic placements, the moon in Scorpio, but particularly I would say certain planets in the 8th house, the South Node in the 8th house of the South Node in Scorpio, or even a Scorpio ascendant, it could be that you are more prone to these kinds of challenging dynamics because they may not always be, and this depends. This really can be said primarily for the South Node in either Scorpio or the 8th house, but depending on the nature of the planet or involvement, and even sometimes I find with people who have a Scorpio ascendant, these tendencies can start to make their presence felt. And by these tendencies, I mean either a subconscious and compulsive and not very aware need is even the wrong word. I was going to say ability, desire. I was just, drawn to managing and controlling and an over involvement with others. Giving advice, trying to keep them close to you, trying to keep them under you, not wanting them to exceed you in status. Fearing that they're on their way out, and so you have to find ways to kind of be involved in their lives to make your presence felt because you don't want to be rejected. Often these are situations that have been going on for a while and are dying a slow death. When the sun opposes Pluto, it's not so much a question of, when it comes to the transit, someone successfully managing or controlling you, or someone binding you, as much as it is an illumination in your life, a subconscious reflection and an illumination in your life as to whether you are either being dominated or being over-involved by someone else, or whether you are doing the over-involving or the dominating in ways that are not consensual and that have under the surface aspects of jealousy, aspects of sexual feelings or sexuality, certainly aspects of rejection. Somewhere with Pluto and with the sign of Scorpio, there's a kind of an emotional temper tantrum, an emotional cry for help underneath these kinds of situations. The only problem is that if you are engaged in these kind of lower vibrations, and especially if you're feeling extremely powerful at this time and being a little naughty at this time, be careful, because Pluto has a tendency or an ability to trap. And especially right now, when the sun is opposing Pluto, if you're the one who is being somehow controlling or trying to create damage in someone else's life because you're feeling rejected or disrespected, or if you are jealous, or if you're trying to manage or control, certain archetypes come to mind. It's a little bit like Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard, when she shoots Joe Gillis, I think is his name, in that movie, and says no one ever leaves a star, and she shoots him because she's been trying to hold on to him for so long, and he can't handle the clinginess, and he's really not inviting her, and she feels it. It's not love. I was watching, my big musical discovery this year has been an opera called La Fanciulla del West, The Girl of the Golden West. It's a Puccini opera. He considered it his best work. I certainly find it a very fascinating opera. And in the very first act, one of the characters, the sheriff of the town, propositions the girl of the Golden West who owns a saloon. And he talks to her, and on the surface it all seems very loving. Now, he is married to someone else. She is a pretty upright person. And at one point, as he describes his feelings to her, she very accurately points out to him and says, that's not love. And people who are sometimes find themselves in these Plutonian situations, or Scorpionic situations, are dealing more with feelings of, in their low vibrations, lust and clinginess, and really dealing with their own sense of emptiness. And they mistake that for love, and they think that certain actions or ways of being should inspire a certain kind of gratitude or a certain kind of reciprocity. But as we know, reciprocity cannot be bought. It's either there or it's not there. And I think when people are feeling somewhat defeated or lonely, or can't accept the fact that they have not been successful in relationships, and this is often the case when it comes to people dealing with the more challenging aspects of Scorpionic archetypes or Plutonian archetypes in their chart, in their lives, through these transits, then they feel a need to make their presence felt by a betrayal, or by trapping someone, or by kidnapping someone, or, you hear these stories of people, heck, you're dealing with the whole Britney Spears situation. Talk about control. or trying to exercise control over someone and take away their so that they can't move and they're constantly under your watch. Or else even these situations in the record industry where you hear about people signing people to contract because they're desperate or because they're poor or because they're eager, and then not releasing their records or starting to exercise a kind of control or dominance over them. Often it can have kind of a sexual undertow to them of control. It's not love, it's about making your presence felt. It's about obedience, it's about trapping. And ultimately, often it is revealed that the people doing this controlling, at the end of the day, lead very empty lives. I'm going on and on about this because I really want you to use this time, and I mean maybe the next 48 to 72 hours, because you're going to use this reflection probably as you head towards the later part of this week and even the rest of this week. You might find that you are, as Mercury gets ready to oppose Pluto, communicating about these issues. Where are you feeling like you are somehow being controlled or manipulated, or not having room to be yourself, or not having the freedom to come and go as you please in your life, or feeling like other people are encroaching boundaries, especially when it comes to have to do with either your sense of liberty, your sense of individual freedom, your money, your sense of individual liberty. And I would say, for those of you who, some of us, may need to reflect on where we are the ones who are encroaching on others' liberty and others' privacy and others' private relationships, romantic relationships, family relationships, things we know. It's rare to get to the lower aspects of Pluto and Scorpio without establishing some sort of knowledge and information about the person who is either controlling you or you're controlling. These kinds of enmeshments can go wrong or sour, but sometimes if you are being the person who is somehow misbehaving, crossing boundaries, trying to exercise influence, have lied, are playing power games, are backstabbing, are feeling vengeful, are acting in ways that are inherently wrong, but you want to somehow reclaim your power, be warned. When the sun opposes Pluto, it is all visible. It's like you're in a goldfish bowl, and you might be thinking that you're putting a noose around someone else's neck, but what you're really doing is putting a noose around your own neck. Because in these kinds of situations, the divine spirit in everyone is too strong, and sooner or later, the perpetrator finds themselves entrapped by their own lack of self-worth. Now, the word abuse can get thrown around with Pluto a lot, and I think it's important to understand the nature of the abuse when we're dealing with Pluto. We're not talking about other people's rudeness. That's Mars. We're not talking about other people's deceptiveness. That might be Mercury or Neptune. We're not talking about other people's sweet talking or falsehoods. Again, Mercury, Neptune. We're not talking about a certain kind of seductiveness or a certain kind of attraction for the finer things. We would attribute that to Venus. We're talking about anger, jealousy, grasping. We're talking about people who are leading probably relatively empty lives, who are not willing to face it, who are not willing to face. Sometimes when I find people who are dealing with the negative aspects of the sign of Scorpio or Pluto, whether they have a south node in Scorpio in the 8th house, or whether we're dealing with these kinds of issues, there's a tendency to believe or think that they are attractive, or they have no problem getting suitors, or But ultimately, I would advise any of them to sit down and say, who calls you? Who writes to you? Who invites you? Chances are you are doing a lot of inviting. Hey, do you want to have dinner here? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do this? I haven't seen you for a long time. Chatter, chatter, chatter. And it could be that the people who invite themselves over or come by to see you often want something that you have. You might have some information that they want access to. You might have a house that they want to crash in. You might have a vehicle they want to use. You might have... But outside of that, if you do an inventory, you may realize that no one really calls you. When it comes to people, the fact that the people who are contacting people with these kinds of diminished scorpionic Plutonian things, often it is with the promise of sexuality at the end. It could be people who are wanting to date someone, ultimately because they want to be in a sexual relationship with them. Jan Spiller, in her book Astrology for the Soul, talks about, with the South Node in Scorpio, the courtesan archetype, which a lot of my clients who have that South Node look at it and react strongly to. But I find that they often get confused between a healthy 5th house or 7th house relationship and an 8th house trapping between loving the fact that they can have a non-stop list of people who are trying to get in their pants. And ultimately, if they do an inventory of who is really trying to reach out to them, they might find that an overwhelming list of people who are calling them or contacting them, texting them, have that as their end game in mind. Often, these kinds of people can get over-involved in who other people should date and have judgments and analyses galore, and involvements, can start to get involved in other people's families or have opinions about other people's relationships with their mothers and fathers and ex-husbands and children. They start to scrutinize everybody else. But the moment someone else gives them feedback, they pull up the, you're judging me, you're trapping me, you're abusing me. But there is not enough self-reflection to know where they are entrapped or whirlpooled into a certain type of behavior. And the next step of this kind of behavior then is to start to exercise different types of control. I know this about this person. They have pissed me off. I'll figure out how to, because my self-esteem has been hurt. You can't talk about Scorpio without bringing in Taurus. You can't talk about Pluto without bringing in Venus, because often Pluto is trying to trap Venus. And often Pluto is trying to be Venus. That's where the jealousy is. Money, status, love, wanting it, in the lower vibrations of Scorpio. If you have a North Node in Scorpio or North Node in the 8th house, you're being called upon to act in higher vibrations. And I'm going to leave that for a separate video. I'm actually going to leave it at this. I want you to meditate on where it is that you are in complicated and intrusive relationships with others in such a way that they are either impinging on your freedom, your money, your liberty, where they should not, where they are imposing on your boundaries, not so much through aggression or rudeness, but through complicated emotional feelings. And I want you to reflect on whether you are doing the same to someone else. That's all. Because this theme will continue to develop as this week goes on, and Mercury gets ready to oppose Pluto. And be careful, karmically. Keep your intentions noble and clean. And with these planetary influences, think about the positive aspects of Venus in the sign of Taurus and self-containment and keeping your fingers in your pot and your porridge, as opposed to getting over-involved with others or letting others get over-involved with you. Because if others know something about you, you know something about them. It is rarely in these kinds of situations, these kinds of power dynamics they are dangerous because the power dynamic can switch. If you found this video useful, share it. Like it, subscribe to my YouTube channel, contact information, subject area if you want to inquire about rates for readings or me making an easy to read version of your chart. Okay, I'm going to leave it at this. I'm getting to the 30-minute mark. This is going to stop recording soon. More to follow.